Welcome to NewsRap Local. I'm your host, Justin Chapman. Thanks for being here. After providing a few brief updates on this month's local stories, we'll speak with our guest, Congressman Adam Schiff, whose district includes part of Pasadena, about his new book, Midnight in Washington, and what needs to be done to protect American democracy. But before we get started, let's check out these Pasadena media news briefs.
The City Council's Legislative Policy Chair Council member, Steve Madison, decided to bring a potential campaign finance reform ordinance back to the City Council committee next month. Since January, state law has regulated campaign contribution limits, allowing a maximum of $4,900 per individual. Historically, Pasadena has not had limits on campaign donations. Several residents claimed that campaign limits would remove corruption from local politics. But Madison pointed out that no council members are currently being investigated. Campaign contributions were not the only concerns of the committee. Council members Madison and Jean Masuda, along with Mayor Victor Gordo, also expressed concerns over independent expenditures. An independent expenditure supports the election or defeat of a candidate, but is not made in coordination with any candidate or campaign. It can be used for ads, robocalls, mailers, yard signs, or other communications, giving a candidate more visibility. If campaign reform is a possibility, it will most likely happen before the candidate filing date next February. Local journalist and Pasadena media producer Justin Chapman took second place in the hard news category and third place in the obituary/in appreciation category in the 63rd annual Los Angeles Press Club's Southern California Journalism Awards. Born and raised in the Pasadena area, Chapman has been an independent journalist since 2005, writing hundreds of articles for KPCC, Alta Journal, Huffington Post, LA Weekly, Pasadena Now, and Pasadena Weekly. Both wins were for Chapman's article in Alta Journal, The Daredevil Who Reached for the Stars, about Mad Mike Hughes, the amateur rocketeer who perished in the desert outside of Barstow after launching himself in a homemade steam-powered rocket this past February. Chapman was at the scene recording the launch and crash. He is currently writing a book about Hughes. Former city manager Cynthia Kurtz will soon be serving as interim city manager while the city council searches for a replacement for Steve Mermel. Kurtz was first selected as city manager in 1997 and worked for the city of Pasadena for 20 years. She is the city's first and only female city manager and served with former public information officer Ann Erdman, former city clerk Jane Rodriguez, and current city attorney and prosecutor Michelle Bonaris. Kurtz will work with Mermel to ensure a smooth transition prior to officially assuming the interim city manager role on December 3rd. In a statement, Mayor Victor Gordo said, "We are absolutely thrilled that Cynthia has agreed to step back into her former role during such a critical time for our city. Her familiarity with Pasadena, both our opportunities and challenges, will allow her to have an immediate impact on our government and our residents. And her work with the greater San Gabriel Valley will be an asset."
City Councilman John Kennedy wrote an open letter to his colleagues on the council and Mayor Gordo saying, quote, "The city's executive team is decimated by upcoming retirements and departures." He called on them to, quote, "select a recruiting firm, finalize the position specifications, and determine the outreach process within the next few weeks." Quote, "The time period must be approved by the entire city council and all of this disclosed to the public. I believe it may be prudent for the city council to commission a confidential exit interview of all departing staff to determine whether there are factors relating to their departures of which the city council needs to be aware," end quote. Those leaving the city include the city manager, an assistant city manager, the police chief, the water and power general manager, the director of human resources, the economic development manager, and a number of second and third level management positions that are either departing or vacant. Interim city manager Cynthia Kurtz officially begins December 2nd, although she has already been helping with the transition. However, there are limits on how many hours she can work for the city without losing retirement benefits. So the clock is ticking. The council has agendized the process to choose the next city manager, including a nationwide search in closed session at this Monday's meeting. And Ms. Kurtz will be our guest on the next month's episode of NewsRap Local, so you won't want to miss that. Let's turn now to our lightning round of news updates. 1. Pasadena's 11-member Civilian Police Oversight Commission held its first 2 meetings in recent weeks, the culmination of years, if not decades, of lobbying on the part of the community to establish such a body to provide oversight of the Pasadena Police Department, following multiple fatal shootings of African American men going all the way back to Michael Zinzan's activism in the 1980s. During the first meeting, city staff laid out the commissioner's responsibilities, and those include reviewing categorical uses of force by officers, reviewing investigations of personnel complaints of bias-based policing, recommending changes to police policies, procedures, and training, and issuing subpoenas for non-personnel records. That's an important distinction. 2, Pasadena City Council rejected a $400 million proposal to construct a grade separation for the Gold Line, now the L Line, where it crosses California Boulevard. Metro originally allocated $105 million for the project in 2018 from money set aside for the 710 freeway tunnel project, which was canceled that year. City staff will create a list of potential transportation projects that the money can go to. 3, City Council held a public hearing to consider the Redistricting Task Force's recommended redistricting plan, which calls for slight changes to district boundaries, including moving 1,625 residents from District 6 to District 7 and 985 residents from District 7 to District 2. The report also forecasts major changes in the next 10 years due to the 710 freeway stub, increased housing created by new state laws, and other factors. City Council voted to continue the public hearing to this Monday, November 22nd. 4, City Council voted 5-3 to adopt new cannabis regulations that increase the number of cannabis retailers in District 3 and decrease the required distance between retailers from 1,000 feet to 450 feet. So far, only 2 cannabis shops have opened in the city. 5, City Council unanimously approved eliminating the 90-minute free parking in Pasadena parking lots in order to help repair the 9 parking structures in the Civic Center and Old Pasadena. Some are calling the move short-sighted, as it will likely discourage people from visiting and shopping in those areas at a time when local businesses need all the support that they can get. Beginning in July, the new rates will be $1 for the first 2 hours and $2 for each subsequent hour for parking, with a daily maximum rate of $12. 6, Brandon Lamar, activist and chair of the city's Human Relations Commission, announced that he is running for the City Council's District 3 seat, currently held by Councilmember John Kennedy, who is running for re-election in June. Meanwhile, City Council will consider a campaign finance reform ordinance later this month in response to a state law that caps individual campaign donations at $4,900. 7, Union workers of Unite Here Local 11 held a rally at the Rose Bowl and sent a letter to FIFA asking them to not consider the Rose Bowl as a World Cup 2026 venue until stadium workers have livable wages, affordable healthcare, job security, and other rights guaranteed by a union contract. 8, Pasadena's bad weather shelter will not open this winter for the 2nd year in a row due to the pandemic. A limited number of motel vouchers will be provided and supplies will be distributed at the United Methodist Church, 500 East Colorado Boulevard. 9, the Department of Public Works has issued a request for proposals for work to be done on the Central Library, which was shuttered in May because a structural assessment found that most of the building would be vulnerable in an earthquake. The deadline to submit proposals is December 15th. And 10, the city of Pasadena has filed a lawsuit against Caltech over groundwater contamination caused by JPL's rocket research over the years, including chemicals such as perchlorate. 40% of the city's water supply comes from groundwater. In a statement, the city said it was, quote, compelled to file this lawsuit in order to ensure a continued safe, reliable, and affordable water supply. Congressman Schiff, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Justin, it's been great to be with you.
In his 11th term in the House of Representatives, Congressman Schiff represents California's 28th district. That includes a portion of West Pasadena. He currently serves as the chair of the House Intelligence Committee and as a member of the House Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. In 2019 and 2020, he oversaw the first impeachment investigation and trial of former President Donald Trump. He began his career in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Los Angeles as a federal prosecutor, trying such cases as the successful prosecution of the first FBI agent accused of spying for a foreign power, Richard Miller, for Russia. And his new book is Midnight in Washington: How We Almost Lost Our Democracy and Still Could. Congressman Schiff, what do you want readers to take away from this book, and how could we still lose our democracy?
Well, thank you. Very nice to join you. And the reason I wrote the book is to really sound the alarm about the fragile state of our democracy. Over the last 4 years, things happened that we would have never imagined possible in this country. As we saw the former president tear down one democratic institution after another, use the Justice Department to go after his enemies and to protect those who were lying to cover up for him, use the White House as a staging grounds for a Republican Party convention, profit from the office by selling hotel rooms at a local Trump hotel to Saudis who didn't bother occupying the rooms. And in so many other ways, stonewalling subpoenas, punishing whistleblowers, punishing inspector generals, really eviscerating so many of the guardrails of our democracy. And I want to explain how that happens, how good people that I served with in Congress came to surrender themselves so completely to the obvious immorality of the former president. And also prescribe what we need to do to keep our democracy alive.
And do you think Donald Trump is going to run again in 2024? And if he does or not, what safeguards must be put in place so that people who believe the big lie that the 2020 election was stolen do not take over election infrastructure of counties and states and get in a position to do things like reject legitimate electors, for example?
I do think he's running again. I think it would be intolerable to Donald Trump to watch someone else get all the attention. You can imagine if Mike Pence or Ron DeSantis or Nikki Haley or any of these people were suddenly the Republican nominee, how out of his mind Donald Trump would go. So I don't think he's capable of not running. I think it's pathological. And I think he poses an existential threat to our democracy, just as he did when he last occupied that office. And most dire at the moment is what you were describing, and that is the lesson that Donald Trump and his enablers in Congress seem to have learned from the failed insurrection, is that if they couldn't find a Secretary of State in Georgia, for example, who would come up with 11,780 votes that don't exist, as Donald Trump demanded of Brad Raffensperger, they seem determined to have someone in that position next time who will. And this is why our democracy is on such fragile ground, because too many people have been willing to capitulate to the immorality of the former president. And in the book, I go through how that happened with Devin Nunes, Kevin McCarthy, with Jim Jordan, and so many others, how they came to essentially shed whatever beliefs, ideology, morality they had in the service of that president.
You're on the January 6th committee, which recently, of course, referred Steve Bannon for criminal prosecution. He was indicted. Others have ignored subpoenas. Will there be further criminal referrals? And then how do you get the information you need from them?
I think the indictment of Steve Bannon has had a very positive effect on the willingness of others to follow the law. People who don't want to be prosecuted the way he's prosecuted, and therefore are going to meet their lawful obligations. Now, that's not everybody, and I would expect that there may be others that we have to refer for criminal prosecution also. Look, for 4 years, the Steve Bannons of the world believed they were above the law. Steve Bannon was subpoenaed to come before my committee when the Republicans were in charge of it and refused to answer whole categories of questions, and he got away with it. And when he was later indicted for stealing money from Donald Trump's own supporters, stealing money that was supposed to be used to pay for a wall that Donald Trump once said that Mexico was going to pay for, Donald Trump pardoned him for stealing from his own people. So no wonder Bannon felt that he was above the law. But we have a Justice Department that once again is dedicated to the principle that no one is above the law. And that's a very important aspect of the rule of law.
And when and what is the end game for the January 6th committee? When do you see it looking to wrap up its investigation, and what kind of recommendations can we expect to see?
We certainly plan to finish sometime next year. We've interviewed, I think, over 150 people thus far, but we have a lot more work to do to look into what went wrong on January 6th, what led up to that day, the propagation of the big lie that you mentioned, the effort to corrupt the Justice Department into spreading that lie, into coercing states not to send slates of electors to Congress for the joint session, the expectation of violence on that day, the participation of white nationalist groups, the former president's role in fomenting that insurrection, what he understood in advance of that day about the propensity for violence. All of these things we intend to investigate and compile into a report. We'll be having more public hearings to keep the public informed as we go along. But our goal is to set out a series of recommendations about how to keep the country safe and avoid any kind of repetition of that kind of attack on our democracy.
And switching gears a bit to the infrastructure bill, what's the status of the Build Back Better portion of the infrastructure bill? And do you think that's going to pass?
Well, yes, we expect to take up that Build Back Better bill imminently and send it to the Senate. And I hope that the Senate will move expeditiously to pass it. I believe it will get passed. Whether they'll make any changes and send it back for us to affirm, I don't know. But it will get done. It really has to get done. It'll help seniors with their hearing aids. It'll help young parents afford childcare. It'll help everyone with early childhood education for their kids. It will help attack the problem of climate change and so much more. It's the most significant investment in the American people since the New Deal. So the country is definitely in need of that kind of investment, and we intend to deliver.
In reading your book, I found it really interesting that you wrote that that voting for the Iraq War was I think you said the greatest mistake of your public life. When did you come to that realization?
When I learned that the intelligence that had been really sold to Congress did not support the proposition that was being advanced, that Iraq had an ongoing nuclear weapons program. At the time, I was not on the Intelligence Committee. It was very hard for me to evaluate the strength of the intelligence. But I remember asking George Tenet, who was the director of the CIA at the time and had been a career official, served in both Democratic and Republican administrations, how confident he was in the intelligence on Iraq's ongoing nuclear program, with 1 being completely speculative and 10 being absolutely certain. And he was a 10. And it was hard for me to ignore that. But as it would turn out, we would find no evidence of that program. And the consequences of that war, I think, have been catastrophic in terms of the loss of life, but as well the empowerment of Iran, which poses a far greater threat to the United States than Iraq did. And so the downstream consequences are significant. It did underscore, for when I would later serve on the Intelligence Committee, the importance of getting the very best intelligence, the importance of being skeptical of even the best intelligence, but also the dangers of politicizing intelligence, which was something that I would see again many years later and to a very dangerous degree during the Trump administration.
Right. I recently found a letter you wrote to me back in 2005 when I was elected to the Pasadena Town Council when I was 19. And in your book, you talk about your first unsuccessful campaigns for office and how fundraising plays such a critical role in winning elections. So sort of a 2-part question. 1, how can we get young people involved in politics and raise up that next generation of leaders and support the young, diverse people who want to run for office but don't have the connections to raise tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars? And 2, how do you handle the meanness of politics, the scorched earth tactics that you have certainly you've seen no shortage of in your career?
Well, first of all, I can't believe that we're both so old. That was quite a few years ago. But the good news is that notwithstanding how dark and difficult these times are, some of the very best people, I think, who've ever run for Congress have been running for Congress. The class of 2018, the Democratic class of 2018 is, I think, the strongest class of new members that we've ever had. It's a very diverse class. It has a lot of people who served in the military, in the State Department and elsewhere. I think in the same way that people joined the service after 9/11 to defend the country, many decided after Donald Trump was elected and seeing the damage he was doing to the country that they needed to serve again, this time in public office. So I'm really reassured to see good, great, new young people running for office. Of course, not just for Congress, but for school board and city council and other important positions. I do think in terms of the campaign finance problem you mentioned that we need very serious campaign finance reform, which is why I'm a strong supporter of H.R. 1, why I've introduced a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United and permit public financing of campaigns. But finally, I would say in terms of, how have I dealt with all of the negative attacks and the presidential attacks and taunts and whatnot. It helps to have a thick skin, certainly, which I think I do. But it's gotten way beyond that these days to the point of recurrent death threats. And what really does concern me is those pushing the big lie right now, the former president, so many of my Republican colleagues in Congress, they are breeding distrust about whether Americans can rely on elections to settle our differences and to decide who should govern. And if they succeed in persuading people that we can't rely on elections anymore, then what is left but violence? So what they're doing is really dangerous, and we are all seeing it reflected in the level of threat. And we have to put a stop to it. And I think the public needs to demand it of us, and we need to demand it of ourselves. That is a paramount concern I have right now, but I'm very, nonetheless, optimistic that we're going to get through this dark time. I think we are in crisis. It's hard to see how it ends. Sometimes it's hard to see if it ends, but it does end. This too shall pass. But what we do right now will determine how quickly it passes. And so we all have a role to play right now.
I'm really interested in the so-called Havana syndrome, where U.S. diplomatic personnel abroad experience all kinds of severe symptoms, headaches, other things. It seems like some kind of we don't know for sure, but some kind of like microwave weapon attack. What is going on there, and what's being done about it?
The short answer is we still don't really know. We are devoting a lot of our resources, time, and attention to getting to the bottom of that. What's causing these anomalous health incidents, where people are suffering serious traumatic brain injuries and other symptoms, and we still don't really have a definitive answer. I can tell you that we're doing a lot better in making sure that the people who are affected get the help that they need, the treatment that they need, the guidance that they need. In the beginning, I think they weren't taken seriously, and that was a catastrophic error. But I think that much has been corrected, and there are, I think, no higher priorities in the State Department and among the intelligence community to get to the bottom of this. But at this point, I still don't have a good answer.
Mm-hmm. And then finally, what's next for you? Do you want to run for Senate if that seat opens up? Is there another office you have your eye on? Are you a House lifer? What are you looking forward to next?
Well, my plan right now is to run for re-election, and of course, we're all waiting with bated breath to see what the new district lines look like. Maybe you'll be my constituent again. That would be wonderful. But beyond that, it's hard for me to look too far. My father gave me some good advice when I was young. He said, if you're good at what you do, there will always be a demand for you. So I think probably the best politics is just trying to be good at what you're doing and let the future take care of itself. So that's my strategy. But I will keep you informed of any future plans when I make them.
Great. Well, the book is Midnight in Washington, Congressman Adam Schiff. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
It's a pleasure. Great to see you again.
You too. Take care.
You too.
Before we go, here is this month in Pasadena history. It was this month in 1885 when a mob of 100 white men burned down a Chinese-owned laundry on Mills Place, then called Mills Street, in present-day Old Pasadena, assaulted Chinese workers and hurled racist obscenities at them, drove Pasadena's roughly 100 Chinese citizens from the city, issued threats of a mass lynching, and were never arrested or charged or publicly named. Shortly after the riot, a resolution was passed by Pasadena officials barring those of Chinese descent from living in the area near Orange Grove and Lake Avenue between California and Mountain Streets. Local historian Matt Horman brought this story to light in 2015, and recently, the Pasadena Human Relations Commission has initiated a process to consider amending a commemorative plaque at the site to recognize that the fire was started by a racist mob. Thank you all so much for joining me for this episode of NewsRap Local with Justin Chapman. Tune in every third Friday of the month at 5 p.m. Pacific. Learn more at pasadenamedia.org and justindouglaschapman.com. Sign up for my monthly email newsletter to get updates on my work by visiting justinchapman.substack.com. See you next month.